LC12 Collaborative Monthly Meeting. Everybody should have a copy of the agenda and the minutes. If you would take a look at the minutes and tell me if you see any deletions, additions, changes that need to be made. Anybody have any comments on the minutes? Okay, I will consider them approved agreement. Like that, I wanted to hold off a little bit for introductions and make sure we got everybody here, so I guess let's do that now. So I'm Jim Curlin. I'm with the Counseling Center and I'm the chair of the LC12.
Carolyn Lee. I'm the Chief Juvenile Probation Officer for the 12th Judicial District.
Ken Larson with the Ontario Hunger Coalition and Mission for Life.
Donna Stinson, and I'm just visiting to hear the lecture.
Tim Miller with Optum Health New Mexico.
Aaron Mallow, LalamogordoLive.net.
Leona St. Louis, LalamogordoLive.net.
I'm Nathan Cannon. I'm doing my field experience with GOH.
I'm Patty Greer. I'm a counselor at Chin's.
I'm Sandra Eddington, and I'm a counselor at Chin's also. I'm Susie Galea, City of Alamogordo Mayor.
I'm Jenny Alexander. I'm with St. Francis Jail Ministry.
Karen Hutchison with the Southern New Mexico Wellness Alliance.
Alvina Locklear, just an interested community member.
Adrienne Semino, I'm with Page-All, and I'm also an interested community member.
I'm Lisa Patch. I'm the Director of Health Services for the Alamogordo Public Schools.
My name is Ron Bueller. I'm an interested member, community member, business owner, and this is part of my powerful work.
Ken Nicholson, Peace and Justice at Waterloo.
Denise Lang, I'm the administrative coordinator for the Behavioral Health Local Collaborative, DLC.
Dwayne Barbady, Alamogordo Daily News.
We're all the signs of it all. Richard Newton, I'm a speaker for LEAP. I spent 22 years with Customs down on the border, as a pilot, I'm a pilot, whatever. And you'll find out more in a few minutes.
Okay, well, thank you. Welcome all, Mayor. And I guess we can go ahead and move on. I haven't heard from Jesse, so I'm assuming there's no cabinet report for today. Cabinet report. You probably know more than me. I've been out of circulation.
Well, we didn't have a cabinet meeting this month, so we haven't gotten together. What we have done, every year the Behavioral Health Local Collaborative has a star, somebody in the community who has really given to the community in behavioral health. And this year our star is Kim Larson's wife, Kelly Larson, and she'll be going to Santa Fe for Behavioral Health Day on the LC. And I think that's the only news from the cabinet. And subcommittee's almost the same thing.
Right.
Everybody's gearing up to see what changes are going to be happening with Medicaid and the new health care. So I think everybody's sort of on a kind of wait and see, kind of preparing what's going to be happening.
Right. I'm still waiting for the announcement. You know anything new?
Nope.
Waiting for the announcement on who the players are going to be in the Centennial.
The last announcement was that they're now in contract negotiations. Decisions have been made, so they will not make announcements until those contract negotiations are complete at the end of the month.
Do we know how many are in contract negotiations?
That's even know that.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm glad I'm committed to coming here to know more, but we were just hit on January 2nd with all of a sudden this new rate schedule and new coding and all of that, and we didn't have any advanced warning or anything, and I was just wondering what was going on with that, because it amounts to at least a 10% cut.
I can respond to that.
Okay.
That is not a change that was made by the state, by Optum, by anybody. It was made by the American Psychiatric Association. They manage the CPT codes.
Okay.
In the medical health world, those changes are made annually, but we haven't had significant changes in about 15 years in the behavioral health world. So the goal of the changes is not to hit you financially. The goal of the changes was to better track the services that therapists, psychiatrists, et cetera, provide, so that in the future, when we are in a position to ask for money, or when they're in a position to ask for more money, they can better show what services are being provided. Those changes to the CP codes were requested to be cost neutral for providers. Obviously, it doesn't feel like it's going to be that way, but that was how it was supposed to be.
Okay.
And so the state implemented the decisions that were made. And I'm not positive about this, but I think this doesn't just impact Medicaid codes. I think this impacts all insurances. So, yeah, that is the reason that we were delayed in getting the new fee schedules out, is we had to wait for approval from the state that they met their requirements. So we waited. They would have been out several weeks sooner, except that we were waiting for a response from the state on the approval.
This might be more unintended consequences. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question for Chins. What does that mean if you see a 10% cut to your reimbursement? Does that mean you're reducing your services, or what's going to happen?
It means we're going to have to see more clients to make the same amount of money.
Okay.
Yeah. And essentially, the way that the codes have changed, we have to cut our individual sessions to like 45 minutes. Family sessions, there's no time limit on that. It's not associated with the time, but our family session reimbursement was cut more than 10%. So yeah, and 10% over a month of each counselor's billing, and you have 3 counselors and now 4, that's a lot of money. And we try, and especially with our population, with kids and families, a lot of times there is more things behind the scenes, and we only get paid for when we're actually face-to-face with a client. And when you're working with children, sometimes there's follow-up phone calls with parents, those kinds of things and a lot more involved in scheduling, logistics and all that we don't bill for, we can't bill for those at all. So it's just, we aren't sure how we're going to do it. So it is yeah. And we really didn't have any forewarning that it was coming.
Thank you.
There is also there's an additional training coming up next week, I believe the 15th and 16th. If you look at our website, you should be able to find the link to that. But then there's also a work group later in the month. I want to say the 28th, but I could be wrong on the date of that. And that is to give providers the opportunity to bring back these kinds of concerns so that they can be presented to the state.
Okay. Introduce yourself.
I'm Sharon Hodges with Otero County Public Health.
She needs no introduction.
And if I can just interject, I'm just going to say this. When you ask Mayor what this means, I'm just someone that's been in behavioral health for many, many years in this community. Although I don't wear the hat right now, I have community partners that are near and dear to my heart because I see the services I see over the years asking to do more with less. And the bottom line for me has always been what impact that has on our community, our residents. We can only tax our system so much before it gives. And it would be devastating to this community to lose one more provider one more provider, whether it's an entity or it's a provider that cannot keep that staff in place. There's been a lot of talk nationally about what's been going on in Sandy Creek. But we really haven't had that discussion about mental health, and it's time we do. Because we have a nation in a mental health crisis, but we have funding sources that have not recognized that. And over the years, we have seen resources dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And when somebody comes to me and says, I want a career in mental health, my first reaction, are you crazy? Do you really, even my son, my own son, it's like, but people will do it, and we need good providers. But we need people like you, Mayor, we need people from the county to look at their own budgets and say, how are you supporting our entities? It's great to have a recreation center, it's great to have parks and rec, but when you have a community where their mental health needs are not met, when you have children from the age that they're born, that they're suffering, and you look at what kind of quality of life, we as a community have to make some sacrifices. And unfortunately, right now, we're at the dollar sacrifices, because everyone that has done the people resources are extended to the max. So I'll get off my, sorry Jim, I'll get off my bandwagon, but if you want to know, I was almost tempted last night at the city commission meeting to get up and say, hey guys, when you're doing your budget, think about this, but you have a lot of things on your agenda, but think about it, because it takes all of us, and if it takes penny by penny, anything is better than nothing. And from some local governmental agencies or governmental bodies, we're getting nothing. And we need that. And if it means another provider for Chins, another provider for the counseling center, another something for John Baldonado, this is what we need. So that's the message I'd like you to take back to your powers, to be that look at your budget, because I know you're going into budget. How can we pull out some money and have a dialogue with our community mental health resources and say, how can we as a city get behind you and support you? So I'll get off my book. I'm sorry to take up your time.
In support of mental health, I recognize, and I'm not here to debate gun laws or enforcement, but mental health. And I know with the Sandy Hook, they're talking about regulations, federal regulations, and as a community, as a city, county, state, I think if we band together and say we're for mental health, don't do background checks, I think that would be very positive. I'm afraid, whether I'm for or against guns is not the issue. I'm afraid that if they do background checks for mental health, people will stop receiving mental health for fear that they will not be able to purchase guns. And that is my fear, that people will stop seeking mental health if we go this route with the federal government. And so I think as a city, we can work with multiple cities and be the voice for the state to the federal government. Don't pick on mental health. In fact, make it better. Offer more mental health.
It's a very fine line that we're walking on that.
It is a very fine line.
Because people have rights as well.
Yes.
And there's an issue you have to deal with, individual rights and the rights of community, and both need to be recognized.
Yes, I will say if there's background checks for mental health to purchase firearms, that will be a hesitation for many to seek mental health, and that is a fear of mine in this community.
I appreciate your input.
Thank you.
I don't know if you all heard about the murder in Chula Rosa. The kid that went in and with one of the knives that you cut the boxes, that's how he killed that lady. He slashed her face, her body, cut her throat. That kid had mental problems. The mother had been taking him, trying to get help. She finally married somebody, and he tried to help her, and the kid told him, I'm gonna kill you also, But it seems like all of a sudden, nobody's there to help these people. And then this is what happens. I mean, it was a horrible thing. I mean, the way he cut her up and everything. And,
if I could comment, because we are the safety net, the counseling center, for Otero and Lincoln County. In other words, we're funded by the state to be the safety net. Inadequately as it is, we're still there. I'm hearing a lot of the services aren't there. Now, we have to stretch, and certainly we can't provide all the things we'd like to. We lost all of our prevention money. We have no more prevention programs. I mean, we do a certain amount of prevention free. You know, we don't get reimbursed for it, but it's something that's necessary. But the bottom line is, if someone needs help and comes through that front door, they get it. So if someone's not getting help, I don't know why.
I think the problem isn't that they don't know that there's stuff available, it's that they're afraid of what's connected with the term mental health and them being able to come in and how it's going to create a stigma with them, and so they don't want to be labeled or have to be seen a different way. And that's where the education and showing people that, you know, everybody has something. Nobody's perfect, but, you know, if you have an issue, to get help and to not make it to where it's they feel so bad about trying to get the help that they need. So
Well, yeah, obviously, we have in the behavioral health industry for 50 years worked on the stigma because it was there and it's still there. I don't know if we'll ever do away with it. But then things like this come up, and when you say mental health, that's a very big category. The bottom line is that they're really most severely mentally ill, that have bipolar and schizophrenia and so forth. They are not, almost unanimously, not violent people. They're much more often the victim than the perpetrator. Where you're seeing these problems are what we classify as the personality disorders, and it's not particularly a disease per se. It's a lot of learned behavior and a lot of distorted person. Okay, so it's a category we have to look at, you know, and that's something we'll have to get to.
And that is a program that we're looking at having in the future. Maybe on your agenda you might see that we are scheduling a program somewhere around that in the future. So look for that.
Yeah, but you know, I hate, this is good conversation, but we do have a program,
Yeah.
and I have to get to it. So thank you. If you have any further input, maybe we can hang around afterwards. You know, I don't want to stifle input, but at the same time, I want to make sure we cover what we need to.
Jim, if I can just interject, we can continue the conversation tomorrow here at 11:30 with the Representative Yvette Harold. We have her ear from 11:30 to 1:30,
Right.
and the purpose of this meeting is to continue the conversation about mental health issues in New Mexico and how the legislative session would possibly help us with some of those needs, and giving her the background of what's going on in our community.
Where will that meeting be?
Here,
When?
tomorrow at 11:30.
Great, thank you.
And I'll shut up.
No, that's good. That slipped my mind. Okay, what else? Let's see. Project reports, bicycle cycling, he's still doing it. So, what we'll do at this time is introduce Mr. Richard Newton, our speaker for today. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. A little background. First off, my wife is a licensed mental health counselor in El Paso. She's a counselor in the school district, but she's also got the other recurring actuals. So I hear this a lot. My name's Richard Newton. I was a pilot for 22 years with Customs, doing primarily drug interdiction in Florida, Puerto Rico, and down on the border. I started during the Miami Vice days when cocaine literally fell out of the sky in Florida because a lot of it was being transported by airplanes and kicked out or washing up on the beach. I've done some fun stuff. I mean, they gave me a Black Hawk helicopter, a Citation jet, a badge, a gun, and a credit card. So it's been a good job. I mean, and other stuff, airspace security in D.C., flying Black Hawks at Katrina. It was a good 22 years. Personally, my biggest drug bust was 1,000 kilos of cocaine in Puerto Rico, not the cut stuff that they sell, the wholesale, the 100% pure. Estimated a street value at the time of around $80 million. Didn't affect the price of coke and PR by a penny ever. And that's about the time I realized, you know, we can't keep drugs out of prisons, much less this whole country. So that's about the time I started looking at our policies and coming to realize that there are better ways to spend the money than prohibition. And got into LEAP about the time I retired. And this is what I do now as part of my hobbies, if you want to call it that. I go run groups and talk. Because a lot of people don't realize how long we've been doing this. Nixon started the DEA in 1971. Before he appointed that commission, that started the DEA, there was a government commission just like the one on reducing the national debt, and they actually recommended marijuana be legalized, saying the money that we spent on law enforcement could go better into counseling. The quote from the commission, I'll dig it up here if anybody really wants it, but basically says marijuana usage doesn't harm society. And of course, Nixon totally ignored the recommendation of the committee, started the DEA. We've been in the drug war now for 41 or 42 years, depending on how you count it. We've spent over $1 trillion, which is a lot of money, and that almost paid for the Iraq war. Drugs, though, have gone. In 1970, when Nixon started this, drug addiction was 1.3% of the population. The United States passed its first drug control law in 1904. 1.3% of the population was addicted. Last year, anybody know how much drug addiction was in the population, general population? I'm not talking about casual use, I'm talking about serious addicts. After $1 trillion, 42 years, 1.3% of the population. In 1970, public survey estimated that, I think it's 4 million, I'd have to look at my notes, but I'm pretty close. 4 million Americans had admitted using illegal drugs. That was, at the time, the population of the United States was 210 million, I believe. Now it's 330 million. 46% of the population has admitted using illegal drugs. Drug war has made it, I won't say popular, but glamorous to try some of this stuff. So again, estimates are the government, and by that I mean state and federal, spend about $60 to $70 billion a year on law enforcement for the drug war. And that includes enforcement, stuff on the border, a little bit of treatment, but not very much. And if we taxed marijuana at the same rates as cigarettes and tobacco, we generate about $40 billion a year in tax revenue. That's $110 billion a year. I just paid for Obamacare for every person in the United States. Think about that. Arrest. The United States leads the world in a couple things, and unfortunately a couple of them are very good. And one is our prison population. We have 5% of the world's prison population and 25%, I'm sorry, we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison population of the whole world. So we're either a really evil society, or our drug laws are screwed up. Because half the people in federal and state prison are there because of just smoking marijuana. So you come out of that prison, you got a felony conviction, it's on your record for the rest of your life. Might have destroyed your home life and all that. And that's for doing some stuff with a herb that you could argue is not as bad as alcohol or tobacco as far as overall damage to an individual medically. We don't know that marijuana specifically is totally harmless. I personally don't think it is. And I don't have a dog in this fight because I tried marijuana once in college in 1971. And I don't remember a second time, so maybe it's better than my But what we do know is that prohibition does not work, which is our present legal policy, basically. It didn't work in the 1920s because of, think about it, what mental image do you all have of the 1920s?
Flappers.
Flappers, how about alcohol?
Jen and Deb.
Okay, so alcohol prohibition basically gave us the gangs, they gave us disrespect for authority and organized crime. What has drug prohibition given us in the last 40 years? Same thing, basically. Back earlier this summer, I was part of the peace caravan from Mexico. They went from San Diego to DC over a month with all of it. Most of them were victims of the violence in Mexico, which is directly related to the smuggling, especially down in Juarez. God, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I may come back to it. I haven't done one of these presentations in about 6 months, and obviously I'm really trying to just read stuff. But the parallels with alcohol prohibition are, of course, amazing because it gave us organized crime. It gave us, but it didn't work, okay? There were 1,500 bars in New York City in 1920 when prohibition went into effect. 5 years later, that number had doubled to speakeasies. So it doesn't work. We tried prohibition in the 20s. Russia tried to prohibit tobacco in the I think the 1700s. Saudi Arabia today has a prohibition policy. Of course, using drugs there is a capital offense, and they still have problems. Our history books show that prohibition doesn't work. Way back, a long, long, long time ago, there were these two people. There was this substance that was basically prohibited, and there was a guard. Didn't work. I'm talking about Adam and Eve, the apple, and stuff like that. That's called free will, which all humans have. The most addictive, anybody here know the most addictive substance out there?
Nicotine.
Nicotine. It's nicotine. We reduced, the United States reduced by 50% the use of nicotine from 1983 to 2003. We didn't do it by arresting people. We didn't do it by building more private prisons, which is one of the fastest growth industries in the United States. Guess how we did it? Education and social pressure. So in fact, I had a call this morning from the coordinator for the Drug Policy Alliance here in New Mexico. She lives in Santa Fe. And she's saying that the state legislature is getting ready to vote on a bill or draft a bill. I don't think it's even been drafted yet, to make marijuana possession, personal use in New Mexico, a traffic ticket style offense. And that's presently in effect in 15 other states in the United States. So, you know, and in the countries where, and I know I'm kind of rambling, I should go back to my notes, but in countries that have decriminalized drugs or marijuana use, the rates have all dropped. The Netherlands did it in 2001. Their rates for marijuana usage is like 17% of the population overall. Anybody care for tell me what it is in the United States? It's over double that. So prison construction, private prison construction, you know, the old Kevin Costner movie, If We Build It, They Will Come. Okay, so Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who was one of the two senators from Texas, didn't run this year, her husband was a lobbyist for the private prison industry. So in politics, if you follow the money, you know, we did manage in El Paso to get Beto O'Rourke elected. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He was a city councilman who basically just said, let's study this problem. And of course, Sylvester Reyes, our previous congressman, called, because this resolution passed, the city council in El Paso. Sylvester Reyes, our congressman, who's been there for 15 or 16 years, called down and said, if you pass that resolution, I will cut off all federal aid to El Paso. It wasn't even a resolution to legalize drugs. He's just saying, let's study this problem. There might be alternatives to drug prohibition. LEAP says legalize everything. I'm not really going to get into that, but specifically marijuana. We know that cartels get 60 to 80% of their profits from just marijuana alone. U.S. Customs, who I worked for 22 years, will tell you they catch 7 to 14% of the drugs that come across the border. So let's do a little bit of math. Let's make it 10% so the decimal points get easy. If you read in the El Paso paper, the paper here, that they caught 500 pounds of marijuana on the border, how much got through? 4,500 pounds. Again, we can't even keep drugs out of state prisons. $500 billion a year worldwide, illegal drugs. Who benefits? Anybody here think the drug war on drugs has been won? We've been doing it now for 41 years or 42 years. Who benefits from drug prohibition? There's 5 groups. And this is, I thought about this a little bit the first time I heard it, and it's so true. The first group, we have a guy on, a lead speaker. He was the assistant deputy chief of police in LA. In the early 70s, there were 2 gangs, Bloods and the Crips, and they were in south central LA, and that was it. Now they're everywhere. How do they make their money? Sell drugs. The cartels in Mexico, obviously, they make their money by selling drugs. The police is a group that benefits from our present drug laws. Not only is there so much money in anti-drug enforcement that they can, instead of having a little town with 5 or 6 cops, they'll have 10 or 20, whatever. They also benefit from something called asset seizure, asset forfeiture laws. If you don't know what that is, I get arrested for smoking dope in my car. They seize my car. I go to court, and because of some legal technicality or whatever, I'm found innocent. They don't have to give me my car back. They can sell that car and use it to pay for their latest law enforcement equipment or whatever. The federal government can do that, the state of New Mexico can do that, and the county sheriffs here can do that. That's a high motivator for keeping it as it is. Politicians, because they can vote to keep the drug laws as they are and say, I'm tough on crime. Well, the latest public opinion survey I saw, and it depends, it's either 52%, and I saw another one that said 57% of people are now in favor of legalizing marijuana nationwide. Again, people kind of cringe at that word legalization, which should really say is control, regulate, tax. Because right now, who controls drugs? It's not the federal government, not the state government, it's the drug dealers. They set the time, they set the purity, and they said who they'll sell it to. In 1933, when Prohibition was repealed after 13 years, alcohol usage dropped by 1/3. Because suddenly the states could say you can't sell it on Sunday, you have to be 21 years old, bars have to close at 2 o'clock in the morning. During Prohibition, none of that was true. A little bit of history of drug laws. 1904, first federal law was passed controlling drug use. 1937 is when marijuana became illegal. So it's not like this goes back thousands of years. And then, DEA, drug war started with Nixon in 1970. Again, the usage rate of addicts was constant during that whole 105 years or so. And we've just spent all this money that has accomplished, in my opinion, nothing. Ruined lives. Certainly you get disrespect for law enforcement, because now law enforcement is walking around with AR-15s and body armors doing raids. So the other thing that a lot of people don't know, police have something called a clearance rate, which when they investigate a crime and they make an arrest, that crime is now cleared, which means it's off their books. Now, the person may not be convicted that they arrested, but in the 60s, the clearance rate on homicides was 90%. Anybody care to guess what it is now nationwide? It's like 60%. So you can either say that criminals are smarter, or you can say that if we've got a police force of 125 or 30 are doing drug crimes, whereas if we didn't have the drug policies we have, all those 100 would be doing real crime. Because no matter who you arrest for selling drugs, there'll be somebody to step into his shoes immediately, because there's so much money involved. And I quoted earlier about Customs saying they catch about 10%. There's been studies done that they have to catch over 90%, the cartels would still make money. make a profit because of the insane stuff. The other thing I like to say is, when's the last time you saw the distributors of Coors and Budweiser in a shooting war? Probably 1933 or 1932, you know. So cigarettes, same thing. Personally, like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight because I don't do drugs. I could say up until about 2 weeks ago I quit drinking. I can't say. The holidays were a little bit too. I quit drinking for about 5 years, and I broke down the other day. I'm just going to throw it open for questions. Yes, sir.
First of all, I just want to say, excuse me, thank you for your service. And in another life, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about because I worked with DC Metro, 7th District. I don't know if you remember the gangster Rayful Evans, but we had to deal with that. Houses full of dope, money. I've been through the hot data training, maritime operations, all that stuff. However, with that said, my epiphany came on a night in a country in Central America, working with a DEA agent, going to an individual's home, and you find that this person has no other means of surviving other than cultivating drugs. Then you look around and you begin to understand that you're working with countries whose sole motivation is quote unquote this war on drugs. Everything they do, their training, their police forces, the individuals that you work with, they're all either cycled through the United States or we act as their instructors. In other words, they're now dependent upon our economy to make their economy grow, and the only thing they're doing is fighting drugs. If you look closely, you see no exports, you see no imports. One country that we worked in, Honduras, is now awash. If you've read the headlines, you know what they're involved with as far as drugs and criminal activity.
I just heard they were the murder capital of the world.
Yes, sir. And I spent almost a year in Capitol and in the surrounding area, and all that work is down the drain. So with that being said, you know, when you're doing those types of things, you're involved. You know, you're either working for your country, working for your agency, or working with those people around you. How do you go about making that epiphany, if you will, at the large level, at the micro and macro level, so that people understand that, I know this sounds defeatist in that world of law enforcement and the military, but we're losing ground, and we're not adjudicating what we're supposed to be doing correctly, we're not doing it efficiently, and we're not doing it in a manner that makes sense. But yet we go out there every day. You know, I still have friends in law enforcement, I still have friends in customs, and they're convinced that what they're doing is right. We can continue doing this another 100 years and not make any more advances than we made in the 10 years previously. So what do we need to do when so many people are invested in this, not from the perspective of stopping drugs, but because it's making money for them. It's making money for the drug dealers, it's making money for local law enforcement, it's making money for governments. So how do we get them to wake up and see that if we're going to make a change, we have to do differently what we've been doing for the last 40 years?
I would say just education is going to be a long-term, you know, people start reading. You can have your debates about gun control. I mean, it's obviously what the mass killings in the U.S. has been is just on a similar subject, is a very complicated issue. It's not going to be solved with a bumper sticker solution. I used to go in and enjoy provoking debate among my colleagues, and I ask them 2 questions. You can only answer yes or no. Are drugs bad? And they say yes or no. And then I say penicillin, painkillers, so forth and so on. And I ask them, you know, and then if you look maybe the liberal side of the political spectrum, you ask them if guns are bad. And they say yes. And I say police, military, so forth and so on. So giving a, you know, it's not, it's kind of a cop-out, but if we give inanimate objects moral values, that doesn't work. It's what is done with that. So I would say, again, to answer your question, long-term is going to be education. And the last, like I said, the last opinion poll I saw said 57% of Americans are at least in favor of legalizing marijuana. You know, just because it's against the law doesn't mean it's bad. Slavery was against the law until 1860. 1865 was the 13th Amendment?
Yes.
It was legal.
And of course, you could have people on both sides of the political spectrum, prohibitionists up in New England countries. I mean, the reason Southern Baptists became Southern is they would argue that, you know, I have to congratulate the women in this room. It only took them about 100 years to be intelligent enough to vote. You know, think about that. There are a lot of places in the world today that women still cannot vote. Was that right? No. So I'm just saying, you know, our perspectives on these things change over time. Marijuana, again, was only illegal in 1937. That's what, 60, 75 years ago? And there are places in the world that had just finished, God, I was out at the DPA conference last November, and the guy sitting next to the lead booth is a French journalist who lives in Hong Kong and LA. And he had written a book about drug policy all over the world. And his comment is, you know, there are Asian countries that have a genetic problem with alcohol. You know, it's carried in their genes, so they never had a high alcohol usage rate. Drug policy, you know, the United States comes in and says, drug war, if you want this money and this training, you have to support our policies. And now they have an incredible alcoholic problem because they have the genes like the Native Americans, and they have, you know, a problem with alcohol that they, and then before their tradition was marijuana. And because, you know, humans, if you accept the fact that humans have used recreational chemicals for at least 10,000, I mean, we know that there was beer and wine in ancient Babylon, you know, and I suspect it can go way back, you know, before that. And marijuana does grow wild. I suspect our ancestors knew about its properties a long time before. And I didn't really want to get into this, but if you look at the origin of drug laws, a lot of it is racist.
That's correct. Very racist.
Whites, blacks, Mexicans, Hispanics, Asians, whatever, have the same rate, pretty much the same rate of marijuana usage in the United States. If you're black or Hispanic, you have 13 times greater chance of spending time in jail than if you're white, arrested for the same crime. Now, you look back in the 1920s, KKK against Catholics, against Jews, against blacks, you know, pretty much name the history. A lot of these drug laws were put in place to keep races, suppress racial freedom, equality, whatever term you want to use. Marijuana, you know, blacks smoke dope and they're going to get the white woman. Alcohol prohibition, the Germans. The Germans and the Jews and the Catholics use wine so much. If you really look at the history, a lot of motivation for a lot of these drug laws came from racial suppression.
Washington DC and the crack cocaine and powder cocaine.
Exactly, that's the most recent example. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you're talking about laws, I think for the government to be for the people, if the people were to be more united in the state, we don't want prohibition or government control because that infringes upon our free agency.
I think you're going to see, I mean, look at Colorado and Washington State this last election. What's going to be interesting is to see how the federal government reacts to that. Because we got a president that smoked dope and used cocaine. He admits it in his books. His predecessor used cocaine. Never admitted it, but everybody knows it. His predecessor, Bill Clinton, said smoke dope, didn't inhale. Then what blows my mind about Clinton is 6 months after he's out of office, he says we should have legalized marijuana. So, you know, and the thing is, like I said, 57%, I think it's going to be an issue like gay marriage and a few other things. I think as people my age die off who are against this stuff, and to young people, it's not an issue.
I do think for all conservatives, it's an issue because drugs are labeled bad. It's bad and it affects people. I think for conservatives, it is an issue.
No,
unless you talk about free agency.
On both sides of the political spectrum, I mean, George Shultz, Bush's Secretary of State, has come out saying this should be legalized. William Berkeley, the conservative writer, it should be, Bill Buckley said, you know, this should be, if you go to the LEAP website, we've got kind of a list of people who...
Pat Robertson.
Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck says it should be legalized.
Okay.
It comes down to me it comes down to, should the government be able to dictate what you put in your body? I would say no.
No.
Now, if there is, if somebody's driving a car and they're high and they cause an accident, we already have laws for that. We have laws that prevent people like me, pilots, from getting in an airplane and flying while under the influence of any substance, actually, including alcohol. So the laws are out there. We don't actually need more laws. We just need enforcement of what we've got.
Yeah, I want to speak from someone who sits in the middle of this argument, because we do treatment and so forth. If you look at economics, if there's a market, a business will be successful. If there's no market, a business goes out of business.
Correct.
Our problem is that there's a market, and a big one. And where we've cut the dollars is in the programs trying to address dealing with the market. And as long as we don't deal with that, I don't care whether drugs are legal or illegal, it's not going to stop. We have to, and it's a generational thing. I started doing prevention back in the early 70s when we looked at 10-year or even generational progress. Now they want you to show that you did it this year. Well, it doesn't happen this year. It's a generational issue. Our hope of this generation, forget it. It's not going to change. What we have to shoot for is the next one. If we help these parents that are already in it, so that they don't lead the next generation into it, that's where we get it. We have to kill the market.
I'm actually curious. I've heard a figure of $70,000 to lock up somebody for a year. That's what it costs the taxpayer. I've heard like $20,000 or $25,000 to have that same person in a drug rehab program. Can any of you guys that deal with the mental health stuff tell me if those figures? I know
I can tell you,
the prison figures is good.
I think New Mexico is only 32,000.
32 to 35.
So half of what it costs to put somebody in prison.
It's $60, it's $60 a day to house an inmate in our Otero County facility. Just happen to have this on my book. And so that's $60 a day, unproductive time. How much do your counselors get an hour?
For a professional minimum wage.
I mean,
If we redirect DEA funds to mental health funds, it would be more productive.
exactly. I mean, again, we stop nicotine, cut that usage in half by education, peer pressure. You see a movie with somebody smoking, you don't see movies with people smoking anymore. In fact, I just spent a couple weeks in Thailand, and on the TV over there, they blank out. Like here, if you saw like a porn thing on TV where, they show a nipple and the networks go crazy, they blank out people inhaling cigarettes in movies. They have the little thing on the screen. So, although I admit I'd almost rather see cigarette commercials on TV than the drug stuff that is the drug, get this drug if you're impotent and then you only have these side effects.
But I was just going to say that I wanted to add to what you said. I think in America there's this false sense of reality with respect to many of the things that go on. We have Planck's platforms, conservatives, liberals, progressives, whatever you want to call it. And I find that quite often people judge the totality of the situation based on their own personal views. It's not always true. I know years ago it's irrelevant, but I had what we call now an executive security clearance. I mean, that's top secret, all that good stuff. The questions I was asked back when I first got mine are no longer the exact same questions that they ask people today, because they cannot find people who have absolutely no drug use in their background. It is exceedingly difficult to find qualified people for the FBI, Customs, all those different government federal agencies that came from my generation, so to speak. So they've had to evolve with the times with respect to the people that they hire. In other words, back when I was doing that stuff, it might have been zero tolerance. Now the questions may be to the extent, well, have you ever smoked but never inhaled? They can accept that, but they couldn't accept that in the past. The point I'm making is we have a problem, and there is drug usage. I'm not saying it's widespread. I'm not saying it's a negative or a positive, but I'm saying it does need education, needs treatment. We need to wake up because it is there.
Well, we'll go back to one thing I said. I said there were 5 groups that benefit from our present drug policy. I forgot the 5th group. It's the Taliban, the 4th. Taliban, how do they make their money? Selling opium poppies. How much do you think heroin really costs if it wasn't illegal? I will say that Zurich, Switzerland, which is a really, really radical capitalist society, has a heroin maintenance program. If you're an addict, you go in, you get a shot of heroin, not methadone, not anything else, shot of heroin. That program has been so successful, it's been copied by 5 other countries, including Great Britain, Germany, Canada.
Dosing centers?
Pardon?
Dosing centers?
It's in Poland too.
In Poland, so maybe that's 5, maybe there's even more by now. HIV, all the indicators drop dramatically. And if a person's a heroin addict and they're getting heroin, they can work, they hold a job. It's when they're not getting it that they become desperate to buy it. Why is it so expensive? I mean, from what I've read, every one of these doses is like $2 per day, which is zip compared to what the cost is for HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, committing crimes on the street. Again, if you propose that in this country, whoa. I mean, Obama stirs a little bit of controversy now and then, especially like El Paso, they only have one talk show that carries Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck or whoever.
What about the case of Quaaludes, where the DEA agent, I can't remember his name, but he got the pharmaceutical companies to stop making the main ingredient, and now Quaaludes are out the street and they're long gone. And then with the pseudoephedrine, where the pharmaceutical companies lobbied extensively.
Well, again, I would say, I mean, this is personal opinion, anytime you prohibit something that there's a market for, the market will exist. So if we legalize everything, not just marijuana, Leaf's position is legalize everything and then treat people under the present laws. Again, who controls heroin sales in the United States? It's not the government, it's the dealers, right? So wouldn't you rather have it alcohol, we go again back to alcohol prohibition. What did you get out of that? You got bathtub gin that people went blind on. You don't have it now because the government regulates the purity and stuff of the alcohol producing companies. Again, so who would you rather regulate sales and you can buy the stuff, who they'll sell it to, so forth and so on? I'd rather have the government do it. One, it's a source of laws, it's a source of revenue. Take that $40 billion a year we could get just from taxing the stuff at the same rates we do alcohol and tobacco, and use that money for treatment. Because I just sat here and heard about and this is without raising taxes, it's without cutting DOD, and all the people who are in all these law enforcement agencies right now that have to deal with drugs, turn them into counselors. Prison Guard Union in California was the strongest lobby against marijuana legalization. I think it was the 2008 vote. Why? Legalize it, you're not going to have a prison population like that. You don't need as many prison guards. Follow the money.
Yes, sir. Call it.
Okay.
And I'll take advantage of being the chair, RHIP thing. I'm going to say this. I don't care whether you're an addict legally or illegally, you're an addict, and it will destroy your life. And that's what we've got to keep in mind. Correct?
Correct. Not for that.
And how much you know the films that you have? Kim Larson is in this film, and we have Boys and Girls Club kids that are in this film.
Also, I gave most of my leaf junk to
So please take them with you.
I got some bumper stickers here and some of these little leaf badges. If anybody wants them, please take them. That way I don't have to take them back to the house.
Anybody have anything you'd like to input before we close?
As a mother, I had 3 teenage daughters during the 70s. And if we all remember the 70s, marijuana was everywhere, drugs were everywhere, everybody was doing it. My daughters, luckily, never got arrested for what they did. They are now contributing citizens to the community. One of my daughter's girlfriends did get arrested for distribution. She had a little over a pound of marijuana. She got arrested for possession and distribution, went to prison, never finished school, never finished high school, never went to college, had 5 babies with 5 successive men, ended up killing herself because that prison time destroyed her life, did not build it back up again.
I was going to say, you said you're meeting tomorrow with your state representative. Tell them about this bill I mentioned about making marijuana a traffic fine.
I think I think that I did hear that.
Yeah, it hasn't appeared. I just asked the woman if she had a number on the bill. I mean, the person I talked to in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And she said, no, not yet, but, you know.
Yeah, I think the last I heard that they hadn't assigned anything.
Mayor, you want to?
Oh, I just, as a parent, I will say the parents in my generation where they have children in school, middle school, high school, they'll argue for prohibition because they're trying to keep drugs out of school, only it's the opposite. It's not happening.
It doesn't. It's easier to buy marijuana than beer.
I will say it's not the government's job to parent and create prohibition and create the problem we now have in schools. It's up to the parents to build strong, independently minded children that can say no to those substances.
Well, also, again, you look at all the public opinion surveys of high school kids. They will tell you almost 2 to 1 it's easier to buy marijuana than beer or alcohol, but you got to have an ID.
Yes.
And
thank you.
You know, DARE does not work. I did some of the DARE programs with kids landing the Black Hawk or the helicopter on the campus. It was a hoot, but it doesn't work. You got to tell the kids the truth. And again, tobacco. We reduce just by peer pressure.
Actually, the thing about you saying it's the truth, tell them the truth, I just want to say quick, my dad went to Woodstock, he's a true hippie, he smoked the whole time I was young, and you know, so he taught me about it, but it didn't make me want to go out and do it. Did I do it? I was a teenager, of course I did it, but the fact is my mom was so against it that I wound up, and she's a constant cigarette smoker, I smoked cigarettes longer than I ever did doing marijuana. And it's because of the education that I had behind it, and I think that's where it comes into play. So, I don't smoke.
We could go. We could go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting over, and if you want to stay and talk, feel free to. Thank you, everybody.
And if you didn't sign in, if you sign in on your way out, if you haven't